This was a chilling murder in a quiet part of Scotland. Probably never seen that type of crime before.
It was at this point on Arbroath Seagate beach that the grim discovery was made this morning.
When we got there, we knew it was no joke. These men thought they had committed the perfect murder.
It was a real surprise when we found out that there was this woman living in a shed.
We found a dead body underneath the floorboards of the living room.
We were never able to establish the cause of death.
I believe in Scotland we've been able to deliver a unique service.
To identify suspects is one thing, and then to prove people are guilty of a crime is something completely different.
Although you see a lot of dead people, you treat everyone as an individual with respect and with humanity.
Forensic scientists, they are silent witnesses and they are the eyes and ears of law enforcement.
This time, the forensic team revealed the perfect murders. So carefully planned, the killers thought they'd escape justice. On the 1st of April 2008, Graham Macmillan had just been promoted to Chief Inspector and Head of CID for Angus, one of the most widespread rural regions in the United Kingdom.
Once I had completed unpacking, I had a look on our command and control system, which logs all the incidents that the police are within Tayside are dealing with at that time. There was one jumped out at me, which was head found on beach in Arbroath.
2 young children, while walking along the beach, had come across a black plastic bin liner. In that bin liner, the children seen the dismembered head of a human being. I'm sure it was a very gruesome discovery for those young kids.
The children were understandably shocked by such a gruesome find. Officers trained in counselling were quickly brought in to help them cope and take their statements without further trauma.
They were aged about 8 and 11 at the time. Quite a horrific find for them.
Dr. Victoria Morton is head of scene examination, responsible for overseeing every murder site in Scotland. Outdoor murders are extra challenging.
It was such a windy day that it was very difficult to actually put up any type of tenting. There was actually police officers standing with tarpaulin to try and shield the scene examination staff, the biologists and the police activity so that the press didn't get any gruesome pictures.
We were very, very keen to engage early on with the senior investigating officer to make sure that we would be securing the evidence before either the wind, the rain or the tide had an impact on it.
There'd been quite a storm the night before and there was a lot of items washed up on the shore. A few hundred yards down from where the head was lying, we found a pair of hands.
Body parts were found over there beside those white buildings. Where did they come from? Well, local fishermen have been mulling that over. They say pretty much anywhere. Perhaps from the south, from Dundee or Edinburgh, perhaps down from the north in Aberdeen. One thing they are sure about, this is the first time in living memory a body has been found in Arbroath Beach.
The dismembered hands, which were found in a separate bag to the head on the beach, had been cut in a specific way.
The person or persons involved maybe had some connection with the butchery or meat industry.
Essential that we identified who this person was, because at this time all we had was some body parts. We didn't know what the circumstances were, who this person was.
This kind of murder was a rarity, and the head had deteriorated by being in the sea for a long time. So Graham decided he needed highly specialist advice. The Centre for Anatomy and Human Identification at Dundee University could help by creating a post-mortem depiction of the head.
Now, a post-mortem depiction is a type of forensic art that gives a professional judgment on what this person would look like in life.
While waiting for the facial reconstruction of the victim, the mark enhancement technicians at the Dundee labs examined the bags for any evidence. Crucially, they recovered a few hairs. DNA samples and nail scrapings were also taken, but they struggled to develop any fingerprints that might have been left on the bags.
Day 2 focused on the post-mortem, where the 3 individual body parts, the head and the 2 hands, were treated almost as if they were from different individuals. You couldn't assume at that point that they were from one person.
As they were looking closely at the teeth, they recognised that some of the dental work probably wasn't up to the standard that they would have expected in the UK.
When the reconstructed head came back from Dundee University, it was photographed to go to the media.
She's believed to have been white. She's in her mid-20s to mid-30s. She has brown eyes, brown eyebrows and shoulder-length brown hair. She had a pale complexion with light freckling across the nose and cheekbones. There is a distinctive scar, circular shaped scar in the middle of her forehead, just below her hairline.
Now that we have a description of the woman, what's the procedure in trying to identify her?
This is an area where you do have a high number of migrant workers, usually from Eastern Europe, so it could well be that in the coming days and weeks this investigation spreads far beyond these shores.
But Graham got a swift and unexpected break. The victim was immediately recognised by one of his own officers. The girl in the picture was a young female migrant worker, Jolanta Bledaiti.
We sent officers up to her home, which was a flat in Brecon, to just check the place out. When they entered the flat, they could see that her room was absolutely emptied. There was not an item in it. They also spotted a bloodstain on a door frame. On seeing that, they immediately withdrew and we called up for forensic assistance.
Really fortunate that they had actually found this small area of blood staining.
We took a sample from that area, and that later did turn out to be a sample which yielded some DNA.
The blood on the doorframe matched. It was Jolanta Bledaiti. The police investigation quickly gathered speed. Graham McMillan began interviewing potential witnesses like work colleagues and residents of the block. Graham's professional intuition focused on 2 men.
One of them was a flatmate, and the other one's a friend but had worked in the past with her. Something just didn't square up with these guys.
Both suspects, like Jolanta, were migrant workers. Vitas Platnikas was 41 years old, and Alexandra Skirda was 20.
A thorough examination of the flat in Brecon where Jolanta Bledaiti had lived was conducted. This was a very thorough search.
In the bathroom, dilute bloodstains were found. Blood mixed with water.
We also examined carpet. Although the room didn't show too much blood on the outer surface, as we lifted the carpet up, there was a significant amount of blood on the underside of the carpet. Was this a site where the body was maybe cut up? Was this a site where someone had been killed and then moved on? And we then began to look in the flat in a more detailed way, trying to understand what horrific event had actually happened in this flat.
There was blood found within the bath and some blood spatters, and the pattern of those were very useful in finding out whether she was alive or dead when she was decapitated.
The inside of the flat was revealing its grisly secrets. But there was more to come outside.
There was a small cellar area in this block of flats, and in there was a wheelie bin. When scene examiners looked inside this wheelie bin, they found some bags of clothing and personal belongings.
The clothing had blood staining, and again through forensic examination and analysis back in the laboratory, where we were able to identify that it actually came from the deceased.
There was some gaffer tape found there which had lots of long human head hairs on them, which looked to have been forcibly removed. As it was wrapped around the head and then pulled off subsequently, it would pull hair out from her head, and we were able to obtain DNA profile from the roots of that head hair.
In addition to the hair, there were faint bloodstains on the gaffer tape. Again, DNA profiles matched Jolanta Bledaiti. But there were further revelations and a breakthrough when mark enhancement specialists examined the tape.
We recovered some DNA and some fingerprints, and the DNA and the fingerprints matched back to one of the suspects in this particular case.
During Skirda's interrogation, he was impassive. But soon, cracks began to show in his story.
He'd known Jolanta for a good 2 years. They had lived together within the flat, and they'd also cohabited in a previous accommodation. Whilst he didn't really show any emotion during the interviews, it clearly was affecting him, and he was wanting to get it off his chest.
Skirda started talking and very quickly implicated the older suspect. Platnika's background hinted at a violent past.
He said Vitas Platnikas very much led the crime and the planning of it. He served in the military in the past in Afghanistan in the Russian army, we believe, and he was quite a violent man who I think a lot of the community were in fear of.
We had good evidence put her murder at that location in Brechin, and we also had evidence linking Skirda to the deceased.
Skirda had blurted out a stark confession. Graham McMillan and his team had to focus on corroborating it. Forensic teams were redirected to many deposition sites.
It was a huge area that it covered. Stuff dumped in bins and rivers, in parks, right throughout Angus.
Scene examiners were called out to study burnt items found by a riverbank. These proved to be vital.
We received a phone call from the police to ask us to send a team of scene examiners down to the river, and on close examination of the burnt area, the team recognised documents, personal documents that were written in a foreign language, not in English. In further and closer examination, it turned out that it was actually the burnt remains of a passport. That passport did indeed belong to the deceased.
I had teams working on gathering CCTV to corroborate the movements that he said they made.
More incriminating footage emerged from CCTV on a bus. The suspects carried the head and hands in bin bags for disposal in Arbroath. That left Jolanta's torso.
They arranged for someone to give them a lift down to Arbroath with a large suitcase, using the excuse that one of the accused was moving to a new flat.
Once they had been dropped off, CCTV revealed even more shocking evidence. The two men wheeled Jolanta's torso inside a suitcase, on a trolley, in broad daylight, through Arbroath town centre.
Quite nonchalantly strolling down to the harbour and then returning empty-handed.
The police investigation also led to another examination on day 5.
One of our scene examination teams were dispatched to a garage to look at a car of interest. This car was actually owned by a friend of one of the suspects. They initially noticed that the car was extremely clean, both on the inside and outside of the car, almost to the point where it looked as if it had been valeted in some way.
The crime scene examiners found it unusual that no fingerprints or fibres whatsoever were present inside or on a car.
I called upon the services of the Grampian Police Underwater Search Team. These guys came down that day, started their searches for us. They conducted searches at the harbour in the most difficult situation and environment that you could imagine. The water was freezing cold, the currents are extremely strong just by the harbour wall. It's quite a silt-based seabed there, so visibility was next to nil. So, you know, the stamina that they had, the cold and the currents were sapping their strength, and to cap it all, they were conducting a fingertip search of the seabed looking for Jolanta, and they recovered the case. Once we had that and secured it, we again called upon our forensic teams and scene managers to manage the actual removal of the case and Jolanta's body from the sea up onto the harbour wall.
Whenever we opened the suitcase was covered in a lot of silt because it had obviously been in the water for some time now. There were a large number of stones in the suitcase. Obviously, someone had the intention of making sure that that suitcase did not come up to the surface again. And also in the suitcase, we found the torso with the arms and the legs in situ of a human being.
We didn't know that the hands and the head and the body were all from the same individual, so we obtained DNA profiles from all of those components, and they obviously had the same profile. We also checked the vaginal swabs to see if there's any evidence of semen. That was a long shot, but we did it nonetheless. Also looked at tapings or swabs taken of the body to see if we could find any foreign DNA from people that may have dragged the body around.
The handle had been ripped from the case, and forensic scientists worked on it. It was a success. It matched the handle found at the house, with holes in the suitcase. Then another breakthrough. The material used to bind Jolanta's feet matched material from the murder site.
On day 6, the Grampian Police dive team were deployed to recover any potential evidence from the River Esk near Brecon.
The underwater search team also assisted us in the recovery of knives that we believe were used removing her head and hands from her body. There were 3 knives found in the River Esk, which runs near to the flat Jolanta lived in.
There's a lot of forensic evidence against Gerda. There was clothing which we found DNA that indicated he was the wearer of that clothing, and also blood that matched that of the deceased.
After Skirder blamed Plaknikas, his flat became the focus of intensive forensic examination. But nothing incriminating was discovered.
The absence of forensic evidence does not mean that someone has not been involved in a crime. The absence of evidence could suggest that the individual who hadn't left material at the crime scene maybe took precautions to ensure that the material was not left.
With no hard evidence, the investigation ground to a halt. It was DI Gary Ogilvy's job to interview Plaknikas.
I interviewed Vitas Plaknikas on 4 occasions during the course of his time spent within police custody. I found him to be a very, very cold, very callous, very strange individual. He certainly wouldn't commit to anything. The first 3 interviews had been fairly bland in that he basically refused to contribute to anything that I had put to him.
The interviews went nowhere. But Gary continued to probe Plaknikas for weaknesses. He got his breakthrough with conversations on the suspect's Russian army experiences, particularly the wounds he had sustained as a serving soldier.
He opened up and began to speak to me and began to interact with me, and he seemed to be a completely different person in that he was relaxed and willing to commit to certain things.
Plaknikas suggested that during his service in the army that he had conducted similar decapitations during the occupation of Afghanistan. And likewise, he also had, as part of living in rural Lithuania, some basic butchery skills.
But nothing about Plaknikas' army career or witnessing decapitations was used in court. What actually happened at Jolanta's flat that night finally emerged. And it was a gruesome story. After years of hard work, Jolanta had saved £12,000. It was a lot of money to her and the conspirators. They knew about her savings, her plans to buy her own home in Lithuania, and that she would leave soon. When Jolanta said she was renting a spare room to another migrant worker, the men realised they had to act before the lodger arrived. Callously, they pounced on the helpless woman while she slept.
The They'd bound her and were threatening her with violence so they could extract her PIN number from her. They were using the knife, and there were some puncture wounds on her body which we discovered during post-mortem and later were matched with the knives recovered from the river. Once she gave them the PIN number, it was Plitnikis who went to test if he could withdraw money from the account, leaving Skirda standing guard over Jolanta during that period. I can only imagine what was going through her mind while she was waiting for his return, knowing that she'd given them the wrong number. On his return, it would appear that further violence was evinced against her to make her give the true PIN number. Once the true number was given by Jolanta, Plitnikis left the flat to check at the bank to see if he could successfully withdraw money, which he was able to do on that occasion.
And that sealed Jolanta's fate. They brutally murdered her, then disposed of her body and belongings to make it look like she had returned to Lithuania.
Jolanta was smothered in her bed, taken into the bath, where she was decapitated and her hands removed. They cleared the flat as best they could, hid her body in a small cellar. Over the next couple of days, they disposed of various items of her property. Her ID cards were burnt. The weapons that they'd used during the crime were disposed of in a river, and other clothing, cosmetics, all her personal belongings were basically scattered to the four winds over Angus. I think these men thought they had committed the perfect murder. They thought that, as long as they disposed of her body and all her belongings in a thorough manner, then they would have all the time in the world to withdraw the money from her account at their own leisure and never ever be found for it.
The killers knew her head and hands would identify her, so dumped them in different places. Then they chose the aptly named Danger Point to throw her torso in the sea. Plitnikis and Skirda must have thought they'd got away with it. But they hadn't planned on a huge storm or the North Sea tides. The head and hands washed up on the beach.
Two men are due to appear in court today in connection with the death of a Lithuanian woman whose severed head and hands were found on a beach in Arbroath.
These are the two men found guilty of the horrific murder of Jolanta Bledaiti. Vitas Plitnikas and Alexandros Skirda dismembered and disposed of her body. Sentencing the men, the judge, Lord Pentland, said the evidence clearly showed the two of you planned and plotted these crimes with cold-blooded deliberation. And he said your motive was to rob her of her savings.
We made contact with the authorities in Europe to just establish if they had previous convictions. It's routine matter that we would do. Skirda wasn't known to the police, however, Plitnikis was.
Plitnikis had been previously convicted of manslaughter by a German court. Coincidentally, his conviction for murdering Jolanta Bledaiti came within months of another high-profile case involving a foreign national, featured in a previous episode. Slovakian Marek Harchar was jailed for killing Moira Jones, a Glasgow businesswoman. Both murders provoked outrage in the media, and calls were made for tighter border controls for foreign nationals with criminal records. One of the leading campaigners was Moira's mother, Beatrice Jones.
I don't believe there's anyone in this country who would say, yes, let violent criminals in. It's as simple as that. I can't think of anyone, whatever political persuasion, would say, but we're for this. We want these people to be allowed to come in. Come on. We've got enough baddies of our own. It's as simple as that.
In the future, new improved profiling equipment will access overseas databases to identify international criminals faster. Carol Weston, the senior forensic scientist on the Moira Jones case, is studying this now.
Another development that will be rolled out very soon is the kits that we use to create DNA profiles. At the moment, we look at 10 different areas that vary between individuals. The new kits, however, will look at 17 areas, or in some cases 24 areas that differ between individuals. This gives us the power to search databases across the world as opposed to just our own databases, because they'll all be more compatible with each other. But more importantly, it means that our DNA technology will be much more sensitive. So we'll be able to get DNA profiles from very small stains or very old stains, things that our kits are not quite sensitive enough for at the moment, and this could be fantastic, especially in cold cases where we might need to go back and look at some very small and very old samples.
Rapid advances in forensics technology make murder even harder to get away with. Yet some people still believe they can commit the perfect crime. Occasionally, a case comes up where the truth is truly more bizarre than fiction.
A woman had been reported missing by her children, and they were concerned about the information they were given at the time by their father.
The missing mother was 47-year-old Carol Jarvis. When police knocked the door at the family home in Bathgate, her husband Harry answered. He told the officers his wife was there and called her. A woman crawled out from under the bed, but it wasn't his wife. The identity of the woman was later revealed as former millionaires, 57-year-old Rita Hayster. Police were immediately suspicious and got a warrant to search the house.
He had since left the house, we believed, with this other woman, Carol. She hadn't been found, we didn't know where she was, and that obviously led to a search of the house.
And they discovered a dead body underneath the floorboards of the living room. At that point, the police are keen to ascertain exactly who that person is. One, is it a female? Is it the missing person, Carol Jarvis? And be able to recover that body as quickly as possible to be able to confirm that.
The immediate task was to recover any forensic material without compromising other evidence at the scene. This also meant sifting through piles of junk. It was a painstaking process in such a tight space.
If you can imagine how some people might keep lots of junk in their attic, this space underneath the floor basically resembled that. There's loads of junk, bits of furniture, lamps, books, paperwork, magazines, suitcases, that sort of stuff was underneath that floor along with the body. The body was concealed underneath a lot of that.
So we had to do a very staged approach to the examination of removing every layer step by step and documenting that stage by stage for the police and obviously future at court before we could even get to the body. And in itself that took some time. She was only wearing a red dressing gown at the time and no underwear, and this dress was slightly rucked up, exposing the lower half of her body. We then go on to examine and take samples of the body as in situ, because sometimes that it can be really important, because when you start to move a body, especially when it's in a process of decomposition, you start to get further spillage of bodily fluids through the natural process of decomposition.
I suspect the body's been there for about 4 to 5 days. It was a long September weekend. It was very warm as well. There was an element of deterioration there, which made it more difficult for the scientists to obtain material to work with.
It's not a very pleasant situation when you've got a dead body that you're in a confined space with.
Amanda's forensic examination took over 4 hours before the body was removed from under the floorboards, then placed in a body bag. But she had not found any obvious external injuries on the body.
A post-mortem was carried out. We were never able to establish the cause of death. So we don't really know exactly what went on in that house, who was responsible for physically killing Carol. The only people that know that are Harry and Rita. For whatever reason, the pathologists, the scientists, toxicologists just couldn't tell us how she died. We suspected that she may have been drugged, poisoned, and that's ultimately what caused her death. Perhaps she's been suffocated, even strangled as part of that process, but we were never ever able to find out exactly how she died.
As you can imagine, in a case like this, or the police have no information on how that body's come to be under the floorboards, there's pressure for us to, as quickly as possible, to examine these items, to help them with their inquiries and provide that crucial DNA evidence to either charge somebody with the crime or for the family to find out what's happened.
Police trawled CCTV footage and discovered Harry and Rita at St Andrew's bus station in Edinburgh. Holding hands, they wandered over to the bus stances, oblivious of the police search of their home. They boarded a bus to Dundee. Meantime, Harry's eldest daughter Susan had contacted her father on his mobile phone. Harry told her he was with Carol and that he was coming back to Edinburgh. When Phil Gahagan heard the news, he now knew Harry was lying and lay in wait for him.
When Harry pitched up back in Edinburgh with Rita, the two of them were detained. Both of them gave conflicting stories about what happened during their interviews. Harry Jarvis, he maintained that he loved his wife and that he wouldn't have done her any harm. He claimed that she'd died natural causes and he'd put her body on the floorboards because he couldn't bear to be without her. Rita claimed that she and Harry were together as a couple and that they wanted to leave the area and start a new life together, and that he needed to leave Carol, and she knew nothing about what happened to Carol. She said that she didn't know that Carol was dead. Harry claimed not to be in a relationship with Rita, that she was just a friend that he was looking after and had given her some accommodation for a short period of time.
Phil Gahagan knew there would be huge media interest in the case, and it was his very first murder in charge.
I think the pressure that I felt more was the pressure not to fail. There were 4 children there who were desperate to know what happened to their mum, who clearly wanted justice for their mother.
Amanda recovered evidence from under the floorboards that would prove vital. A large piece of parcel tape that had been wrapped around something.
When we examined that back here in the laboratory, we found not only blood but skin flakes from multiple sources on the tape, with DNA profiles matching that of Carol, of Harry Jarvis and Rita Hayster, as well as other fragments like fibres and skin as well. So it was a great source of forensic evidence and biological evidence.
Next, Amanda conducted a thorough search of every single room in the house and made another important discovery.
We found a roll of tape that was in one of the bedrooms, and this was similar to the partial tape that we found underneath the floorboards with the deceased. And when we recovered that and examined that back at the laboratory, we were able to find sources of DNA from Harry Jarvis and Carol Jarvis and Rita as well. We also examined that piece of tape. It had a cut end but also a pulled end, and then when we opened that up and compared it with the piece of tape that was found with the body, we found that it was a physical fit and a direct match from the piece of tape that we found with the body.
It's one of the most eagerly awaited telephone calls, in fact, as an SIO, when the scientist calls you to give you the results of some of their tests.
It's good to know that we have evidence and we've got a DNA profile, but also to have matches to say who that DNA may have come from is something of a feat in itself.
There's a whole load of circumstances there which allow us to charge the two of them with the murder. Then we continue the investigation thereafter to build up more of a case.
We conducted further examination work on medical samples that were taken from Harry Jarvis and Rita Hayster, including nail scrapings that were taken from them at the time when they were detained. When we examined the nail scrapes from Rita Hayster, we found DNA from at least 3 sources, and we were able to resolve those DNA profiles to matches not only of Rita Hayster, which is not unusual, you would expect to find DNA from the swabs the person's been taken, as well as from Harry Jarvis, and what was remaining was a strong profile that matched that of Carol Jarvis. Couldn't say scientifically exactly what the source of that DNA was, but our opinion was that it wasn't through social contact or for other means of secondary contact.
Slowly but surely the whole story emerged. Harry was 30 and Carol only 16 when they first met in London. 4 children later, they moved to Scotland.
Carol was a very slight woman. She relied on Harry a lot. She loved him dearly. That was quite clear. The children told me that. And she was very devoted to him.
Mum, was really in love with Dad, and so she would always look for the best in him. And even you could tell, Mum, that he was the worst person in the world, and she wouldn't believe it,
But Harry was a bit of a fantasist, to be fair. He got involved in all sorts of dodgy dealing. was arrested by the police a few times for sort of minor sort of frauds and stuff like that. He had some affairs over the years, met other women, vulnerable women. He fleeced them for whatever he could. But Carol would always find Harry and they would get together again. He would come back, a sort of cycle would start all over again. Over a period of time, Carol began reliant on drugs, prescription drugs, prescribed drugs, and Harry became her main carer.
By that time, Harry had met Rita Hayster via an online dating site. By then, the relationship had flourished, and Rita moved to Bathgate to be with him. Rita had been adopted as a child by Tom Forsyth, who owned the Just Roll Bakery Company. So, when he died in his early 50s, Rita inherited nearly £2.5 million. She was in her early 20s. But over the years, that money was frittered away on failed relationships and bad investments.
At the time of this murder, she was virtually penniless. Unfortunately, she didn't have anywhere to live at that time. They didn't have any money, and Harry bizarrely accommodated her in the garden shed. Nobody knew that time that Rita was staying in the shed. There were rumours in the local community, but nobody reported it to the police. So it was a real surprise when we found out that there was this woman living in a shed.
I was told it was a summer house. I went round to the rear garden and I discovered that it was a shed, and not a great shed at that. So not only have you somebody living above the locus, but there's also people living in the address adjacent. And this shed is directly next door's patio, where they would maybe sit off a nice evening and enjoy the sunshine, while this woman is living in a shed next door. Also, in addition to that, Harry had a CCTV camera hooked up looking on in the shed as well. And the shed itself wasn't the most robust. There was a window and it was broken and it wasn't made for pleasant living conditions.
Harry would look after her, bring her tea, bring her food. He would allow her into the house every now and then to use the toilet, and then he would put her back into the shed. All this time, his wife was lying in bed and unable to sort of do anything for herself.
There was a basic futon style mattress on the floor of the shed. There was no bed covers, and the only thing that we found was there was a pillow with a pillow slip, and the pillow slip pattern matched that of the design and pattern of the duvet cover that Carol Jarvis was found in and wrapped in.
So bizarrely what we have here now is Rita living in the garden shed and Carol in bed. Harry and Rita by this time have decided that they want to be together. He has to come up with a way of leaving Carol, and this is when I think the plot was hatched to kill Carol. I don't know why Harry decided that the only way to be with Rita was to kill Carol. Yes, he could have left Carol and been with Rita if that is what he wanted. I think though over time, over the years, Harry had left Carol on a number of occasions to be with other women, but Carol doted on him and sought him out, found him and talked him into going back to be with her. I can only assume that he felt that the only way that he was never going to be found by Carol again was to kill her.
However, there were still a lot of obstacles to overcome before the case was ready for court.
It took over a year as well for it to go to court, because at one point the Crown weren't sure if they could proceed with the case because of the complexity of it, the fact that we didn't have a cause of death and we didn't really know what happened in that house. I didn't know if this case was even going to see the court.
Then a serious complication emerged. A successful appeal in another case relating to solicitor access impacted on the Carol Jarvis case.
The interviews that we carried out with Harry and Rita were deemed inadmissible. I thought would have been a fairly straightforward case, turned into be a very complex case.
Unusually in this case, both the accused were tried separately for legal reasons, and therefore I not only gave evidence once, I had to give evidence twice.
Harry Jarvis was the first of the two lovers to stand trial in March 2011.
The evidence that we had became more important because they didn't have a cause of death. But to be able to explain that to a jury who maybe have no scientific background in very simple words, to me as a forensic scientist, my biggest challenge. Because if I can't produce and present my evidence in court well, then the whole case could basically fall apart.
Amanda faced 5 hours under cross-examination over 2 days. The police also offered compelling evidence.
We found a number of letters on both Harry and Rita's possession when we detained them. It was quite clear from these letters that Harry was sending to Rita that he was trying to kill his wife. There was one mention of the drugs not working, it was taking longer than he thought, but soon they would be together. So there was a clear intent there, in my opinion, to kill Carol, and Rita knew about it. I sat at the back of the court and the foreman delivered the verdict, and you could have cut the atmosphere with a knife. We didn't have a cause of death. We don't actually know what happened in there. We weren't able to use the statements of the two accused. So that was something that will live with me as well, sitting there at the back of that court, not knowing whether the jury were going to deliver a guilty or a not guilty verdict. When they came back with a guilty verdict, that was a huge relief for me, a huge relief. I felt that I'd done my job and that I'd delivered that justice for the family.
It's a very difficult time, obviously, over the last few years. And obviously, although delighted, it's a sad day as well.
It's difficult to say you're pleased because, like Graham says, obviously you've still lost your two parents in a sense. So no matter what the outcome was going to be, that was always going to be difficult to comprehend. But I think as relieved or as pleased as you could be in the circumstances, yeah.
I don't really want to ever speak to him, and I won't forgive him for it or anything, so I'm just kind of, to me right now, he's my dad in biology and genes only. He's not like my father.
But there was still a second trial to be heard. In July 2011, it was Rita Haster's turn. This second trial was even more punishing for Amanda.
I actually gave evidence over a period of 3 days, which for me is the longest time that I've ever given evidence in court for a case like this.
It was quite clear that Rita wasn't particularly streetwise. I think she liked companionship, and I think that's what she sought in Harry. I don't know if she suspected that Harry had intended to kill his wife, but she was certainly there at the time that his wife was killed, and clearly she was involved in disposing of the body, if not involved in the murder itself. There was no case to answer at court in terms of the murder, but she was certainly convicted of trying to hide the body.
Rita Haster got 4 years and 6 months for attempting to defeat the course of justice.
I don't think any of us actually believe that Rita couldn't make her own mind up at the end of the day. She still formulated her own opinions, so she kind of just went with the flow. And so, is she a victim? No.
I think the thing I remember most about this was the fact that here we had two women who appeared to be devoted to this man, one who ultimately paid the price and died, and the other ended up in prison because of it, because of him. That was the thing for me. The other thing is the 4 children. I mean, they've lost their mum in horrendous circumstances, but they've also lost their dad. He's been sentenced to life in prison. Their lives are never going to be the same again.
Today, forensic scientists catch more killers than ever.
The future is very exciting for forensic science at the moment, with lots of interesting developments in the pipeline. DNA miniaturisation is effectively miniaturising the DNA laboratory, and it allows us to have a piece of equipment in police custody suites. And what we'll be able to do is take a sample from someone who is in police custody who's been arrested, and their DNA sample can be run through this piece of kit, and within 90 minutes we'll have a full DNA profile from this person, which can then be searched against any DNA database and can be seen if there's a match with any outstanding crimes held on the database. It's going to take away quite a bit of time with the DNA analysis and give you more instant results, and I think it's especially crucial with linking unsolved crimes, for example sexual crimes. If you had someone in who was suspected of a sexual crime, possibly you could link several crimes on the database to this person in a matter of a couple of hours, which in the past may have taken days.
Even so, cases arise where forensic science directly influences a police investigation. On Sunday the 30th of April 2012, a neighbour alerted Tayside police after disturbing a hooded male intruder at 63-year-old John Kennedy's home in Mosqueo Crescent, Dundee. When forensic biologist Barry Mitchell was called in by police, he discovered a grisly scene.
As we were standing in the vestibule looking into the living room, we could see the body of a deceased male lying on the floor, face down, along the front of a sofa. The upper part of his body was lying in a pool of blood. I recall being advised following the post-mortem that there were in excess of 70 stab wounds on the deceased body, and in fact when I subsequently examined the deceased's fleece top in the laboratory, we counted more than 90 stab cuts within that fleece top.
There was no known motive. There was nothing to suggest that there was any enemies involved. There was nothing to suggest that there would be anybody that wanted to do this that had anything against John Kennedy. So we were absolutely reliant on the skills and the abilities of our forensic counterparts.
Scene examiners had identified the presence of a glove within the locus as they went about their recording of the scene, and it was identified that this glove could well be alien to the locus, so it was targeted as a priority item for examination.
DNA analysis revealed several wearers, but in the lab, Barry Mitchell narrowed the suspects down and even had a name: Michael Nolan. He hadn't even come into the police investigation.
Such was the significance of this that it immediately did change the focus of the inquiry. At that stage of our inquiries were not focused on Michael Nolan at all.
Generally speaking, we'll have an idea as to who's responsible, but there is absolutely no question that without the contribution of biologists in particular, this would have proved to have been a very, very testing and difficult inquiry.
Aware of the forensic evidence stacked against him, Michael Nolan entered a guilty plea and was sentenced to Edinburgh High Court to 17 years imprisonment. The Nolan case is forensic science at its very best, naming a suspect before the police. But what will advances like custody suite technology mean?
The difference between the custody suite technology and the technology that will be developed at crime scenes is simply the type of sample. For a custody suite, you're working with a mouth swab taken from a person. It's a nice, fresh sample. It's got a lot of DNA in it, so it's very easy to get a nice single-source profile. However, when you're out at a crime scene, your DNA sample might not be of such good quality, and it might contain a mixture of DNA from more than one person, and that takes a lot more technology to be able to create a quick 90-minute profile, and that's where we're heading now, and that's what we're currently working on.
As we move on, as science develops, miniaturization comes in, and we're now able to do DNA profiling even smaller and smaller machines.
More exciting development will be the crime scene rapid technology, because that way you could actually get intelligence to identify a suspect very quickly, perhaps even at the crime scene, and at that point the person is still out on the street and still free and not in police custody. So to me, that's the one that will make the huge difference. The research and development in forensic science allows us to develop technologies that make forensic science a very powerful tool, and it means it's very hard to get away with murder. This includes unsolved historic murders that go back for several decades.
So, a suspect could be identified instantly. It's becoming almost impossible to get away with murder.